We started with the laws of tsa'ar, ba'alei chaim, causing pain to animals. It's a prohibition. Some people say it's biblical. Some say it's only rabbinic. If it is biblical, most commentaries assume it comes from the mitzvah. It says in the Torah, when you see your enemy's donkey that is suffering under its burden, you shall surely help him to unburden him. And we said there's could be two components, of which one component, of course, is to help your neighbor, to help your friend, even though you hate him. You have to overcome your hatred and do the right thing, even to help your fellow Jew. But the other side of it is one of the reasons why the Torah says this, because the animal is suffering. The animal is bearing a burden which is inappropriate for its size, and therefore it's a prohibition of tsar ba'alei chaim. From here we can learn that in general, one should not cause pain or suffering, undue pain or suffering to an animal. We also mentioned that the Meiri quotes an additional mitzvah in the 613. We drew some really bad pictures of a cow that was threshing. Right? We drew a picture of yeah. You gotta go.
Yeah, I forgot.
You got something?
Yeah.
Okay, the Seder, no problem. I know my art was poor, but I didn't know it was that poor. But the cow was used to crush the stalks of wheat, to separate the berries from the stalks, either with someone standing or a weight on a board that has some spikes underneath it, or sometimes just the animal would walk. The fact that the cow weighs a couple 100 kilos probably, and that could definitely, trampling the stalks of wheat will separate the kernels from the stalks. And that's called threshing. And you're not allowed, the Torah says, Lo tachsom shor b'disho, you're not allowed to muzzle an ox when it's threshing, because the ox smells its food.
And you have to feed it, since it's doing work, you have to feed it as compensation halachically.
That's correct. That's right. It's not a question of compensation, but it's a question of not causing it undue pain. It's quite painful for the animal to be smelling its food and not be able to partake of it by muzzling it. And so you're not allowed to muzzle an ox when it's doing its work. And from here, too, we can learn that you're not allowed to cause pain to an animal.
It's grain that's being threshed?
Grain, yeah. That's right. Different kinds of grains that get separated from their stalks. That's right. On the threshing floor. Now, what you can do, if you don't want the ox to eat up all the delicious wheat berries which you're threshing, you are allowed to tie around his face to underneath his, what's it called? His mouth. A basket that has, for example, berries of barley or other type of food. So as long as he's eating something, then you're not violating the prohibition of putting a muzzle on him. The point is that he shouldn't suffer pain, and he doesn't really know the difference between the different types of feed. The assumption is you're not causing him pain as long as he's able to eat something while he's doing his work. That's why I think in many stores, I don't know if any of you, maybe some of you have worked in a restaurant. Hopefully it was a kosher restaurant. But can you imagine working in a bakery all day long? The smell of the fresh goods. So I think they have a rule that you're allowed to take one roll, or you're allowed to take a donut, or every day you're allowed, right? They give people that work in a restaurant, they get free waiters at a wedding. They're allowed to have dinner. They're allowed to have the food, and that's of course for people. The novel extension here is that we have to be sensitive to that with animals as well. Now, a lot of people know, as the first people who have had pets, they know this halacha. It's a debate whether it's an actual obligation or just a level of piety. Some people say it's really just a rabbinic obligation. If there's any obligation, it's rabbinic, even though it comes from a pasuk in the Torah, which you all know. What am I talking about? That you have to feed your animals before you have your own meal. Where does it come from? A pasuk in the Torah. The pasuk you say twice a day. It says in Vayayim Shamoha that if you keep all the mitzvot, Venatati etar etzlechem bito yorem kosh asafta deganecha tirshchavi tzarecha. You'll have rain and you'll be able to gather in the produce, whether it's the grains or the wines or the oils. V'natati esev besadcha livimtecha, and it says, I will give not only the wine and the oil and the grains, but I also give the vegetation in your field for your animals. It says that your animals are going to have what to eat. They'll have where to graze because of the rains. Where I live, it gets green pretty much for a month a year. The rest of the time it's desert. But right after the rains, the desert becomes green. It's amazing, and it's amazing that the Bedouins who live, they know, and they take their cattle out to graze, and this is part of the blessing that God promises us, that I'll give vegetation in your fields for the animals, and then it says afterwards, the next two words are ve'achalta v'savata, and you will eat and be satisfied. So the truth is, it's a little curious. What are you eating? Are you going to be eating the vegetation in the field just like them? Perhaps. It did mention, though, in the previous verse, that you have the grain and the oil and the wine, which for sure you're going to be eating. The animals don't eat wine. But also it could mean that you'll be able to eat perhaps the animals, and you'll be having the cattle that you're raising for slaughter and for consumption. Because whatever you're eating, the part of the verse which says that you'll be eat and be satisfied comes only after the words where it says that I'm going to give the vegetation in the field for your animals. And from here we can learn, well, as I said, most people assume it's an anchoring in the text of a rabbinic principle, but there is some kind of an anchor in the text for this idea that first the animals get to eat, and only then you get to eat. So your eating comes after their eating. From here we learn you should always take care of your animals before you take care of yourself. A few reasons for this. I'll say a few reasons, then I'll take your questions. I know you guys have questions. It could be because you might forget to feed them. So every time you eat, you feed them, you won't forget to feed them. You've got to make sure to take care of them. Also could be that you owe them. The animals are there. They do work on your behalf. If it's a cow, so then you it's proper to have feelings of gratitude for the milk that you're drinking or the meat ultimately that you're going to eat. So you have to make sure that you have to give them a proper diet. And also if you have a set time to feed them, you won't forget. And the truth is, the rabbis say that primarily this mitzvah refers to animals who really need your care, who can't fend for themselves. Some people say that dogs and cats, although there are a lot of wild dogs and cats which fend for themselves. They know how to scrounge and find little scraps to eat here and there, and you don't really have to take care of them. Some people say, no, the pets nowadays, like Garfield, they're so spoiled. They're so spoiled, they don't know how to do. If you didn't feed them their cat food or their dog food, they would starve to death because they lost the instinct of how to go out and search. And so it's even more important than before to take care of them. The rabbis say in the Yerushalmi, it says, a man should never take on a pet unless he has the means to support them, to take. If you're so poor that you're not going to be able to feed them, don't have a pet. And the earliest case where we see that it's so important to take care of your animals is from last week's parsha. What was the primary career of most of our forefathers?
Shepherds.
That's right. And the Midrash expands upon the King David was a shepherd, and Moshe Rabbeinu was a shepherd. As a matter of fact, when Moshe was taken to the burning bush, it says that he was wandering in the desert. What was he for? Our sages fill in for us between the lines, and they say there was one little sheep that got separated from the rest of the flock, and Moshe, at the time he wasn't called Rabbeinu, Moshe the shepherd, let's call him Moishi. Moishi was tending to his flock, and he noticed, the young little sheep is lost and he's missing, and he went to find her. He didn't just let her go and leave her to the elements. Maybe she'd be eaten by a wolf. Who knows? So he went to chase after her, and he saw her far in a distance, and she had wandered, and God saw the tremendous care that Moshe was showing to his flock, and he said, this man is worthy of tending to my flock, the Jewish people. And Moshe became known as Moshe's Raya Mehemna. He's the faithful shepherd. He became the shepherd of the Jewish people because of the tremendous care that he showed for his animals. And so we have to, as we've said before, we have to show care for animals. V'rachamav al kol ma'asav. Like God has mercy on all of his creatures, so we should show mercy on never cause pain, undue pain to the creatures which are in our care, for sure, and other creatures as well. We're going to see the rest of the class, and we're going to see a lot of different examples of where there might be things which overrule this basic principle. The basic principle is don't cause any harm or pain to the animals. But we're going to see in many, many instances it's allowed. And last week we already covered the basic 3 rules. Who remembers what they are? Number 1 is, depends on the level of pain. Another one is, depends on the level of the development of the animal, how much pain receptors they have. And number 3, third principle was whether or not the animal is in your service or not. That might be different considerations to calculations to put in to when rabbis get asked questions like, well, can you do, we're going to see lots of examples, can you do experiments on animals to develop medicines? Can you, do all sorts of activities, agriculture activities, which are done when you're growing, whether it's geese or hens, in order that they should lay eggs for a longer time. There's all sorts of procedures which are done in farming, and the question becomes, wait a minute, is it causing pain? Well, how much pain? What's the purpose? What's it for? And it gets quite complicated. And the rest of the class, we're going to start to talk about these examples. Also tomorrow, we'll continue to talk about more examples of different common questions which come up about causing pain to animals. But what's clear is definitely no sadism. No kicking cats on your way home because, I'm so angry, I need to get out my frustration. No, you gotta take a punching bag. Don't turn your cat into your punching bag. That's unnecessary pain. Okay, now I'll take some questions. Jacob was waiting, I saw before.
I had read, and I wanted you to confirm for me if what I read was correct, that in Alom Haba, you won't be eating animals. Because, we won't be eating, but also because one of the reasons why we eat animals is attributed to a lower moral level in some regard. Is that true? Right.
So we saw that there are different approaches to, first of all, what is Olam Haba? You mentioned Olam Haba.
Yeah,
it could be the spiritual world. It could be a physical world that, but of a different kind.
When Mashiach comes,
Like when Mashiach comes, maybe is what you're referring to. But we did see that Rav Melamed has quoted Rav Kook extensively in his famous essay about vegetarianism and this our relation to animals. And Rav Kook definitely put in a historical element to saying that at one point, we're going way back in time, at one point men were not eating animals, right, before the flood. Only afterwards do we see that the Torah gives you permission to eat flesh from the animals. And also in the future, he says maybe this permission is only temporary, and there will be another stage of history where it will be beneath our moral, will be on a higher moral level, and let's say it this way: we'll be so careful about not hurting any other human. That'll be all so fixed, and we'll be so refined in that way, so then we'll be ready to go to an even higher stage of making sure not to cause any harm or not to eat the animals. But, we all hope for that day. I think we got a lot of work still a lot of work to be done before we stop hurting other humans. But you're right, there is definitely, Rav Kook writes about this concept that in the future days, maybe we won't, it's not the ideal thing, it's sort of an allowance, it's temporary allowance, temporary thousands of years, but temporary in the big picture, it's not the end game, perhaps that we shouldn't be eating animals. Although, I did say, I think I mentioned to you, I have a book at home of a friend of mine who's a professor, very interesting fellow. He put together a study, and he proved that comparing to all other animal species, the way the human jaw is formed and the way the human digestive system is formed seems very clearly designed for eating meat. And so so maybe, but it could be our whole makeup will change at some point, as Ariel is saying. There may be different stages of the Messianic era. At some point, our spiritual makeup will change, and maybe our physical makeup will change, and who knows. But for now, definitely we're talking about the mitzvot where eating animals is permitted in certain conditions, of course, and we were talking about not causing them undue pain in the process of the slaughter and so forth. Yes, Renan, and then Ariel, you'll come next. Haven't forgotten you. Yeah.
There is the pasuk that the sheep and the lion will be together.
That's right. So that could be interpreted in a number of ways. The Rambam writes at the end of his book, The Laws of Kings, where he discusses the Messianic era. He there very clearly says, don't be silly. A lion can't lie with the lamb. It's against its nature. This is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for the nations making peace. Have you ever heard that metaphor of that the Jewish people are like the lamb with 70 lions or wolves all around us? Anti-Semitism, they're always trying to kill us and destroy us. And right, we're like the lonely lamb, which is so vulnerable. And so this, he says, that's what that means. The lion will lie with the lamb. It means that there'll be peace on earth, that the United Nations will do its job, and everybody will be, there'll be no more war. But that's one interpretation. The other interpretation, we saw it in a different source, I believe in Derech Hashem, and maybe even, I think it was in Derech Hashem, where, no, actually, like I was saying before, that our natures will change, and the nature of animals might change also. Maybe the animals will be elevated, just like we'll be on an elevated spiritual plane. The animals might change, their nature will be more elevated, and if they're more elevated, then they won't be predators anymore. The animals themselves, their nature will change, and the lion will be able, although the pasuk actually doesn't say the lion will lie with the lamb. I know that's a common translation. It's gar ze'ev im kesef, a wolf will lie with the lamb. So, in any case. Yeah, okay, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, but the fact that like we said that we should feed the animals first, like to develop like the chen, the chesed.
That we should become compassionate, sure, we should definitely have sensitivity. Sure, it trains us, 100%. Yeah, it's a good thing. Ariel?
A few things. So, what I read is in the third temple is going to be here, and the Messianic time will come. The time will like revert back to how it was during Gan Eden. Kind of like everything go back to its balance and how it was originally made. So that's just like a comment. That's true.
Could be. I mean, we don't know. We don't know exactly what it'll be like, the future days. I think I've taught you that in a different class. All these matters of the future time, we don't know exactly how they're going to be until they are.
Don't ask questions about future.
You can ask, but the answer is always going to be the same. We don't
Not about the future, but live in the present.
It's only,
That's it.
right,
That's it.
It's only,
Plan for the future, but
assumptions.
as much as possible.
So
Yeah, we do have traditions, but they're not clear. They're not clear and unambiguous. And some people claim to know exactly a prescription of how the redemption is going to unfold. You might have heard, like Mashiach has to come. He's wearing a white robe. He's an old man with a white beard, and he's riding on a white donkey. Right? You've heard that? The riding on a donkey? Never heard that?
The donkey part, yes.
The donkey part, yes. So yeah. So there's a tradition like that, but there's lots of other traditions, and we don't know exactly. I don't know of any prophecy that speaks about exiles returning on airplanes. I know that it speaks about you should come back on the wings of eagles.
what about the bones that go underground and back to Jerusalem?
There's all sorts of traditions about that, right? It could be that those will be literal. It could be that's a metaphor. I don't know. But I don't like those rabbis that seem to, they tell God what he can do and what he can't do. And says, what? You're bringing the ingathering of the exiles through a secular government? You can't do that, God. That doesn't fit the picture that I had in my head, is that everybody's going to be keeping Shabbos and all the mitzvahs and be holy, and everybody's going to be doing tshuva, and only then will you bring them back to the land of Israel. Excuse me? You're telling God what order he has to do things? So we have prophecies, but they're not unambiguous. The prophecies that the guy, what did we read from the Rambam the other day? The only difference between this age and the age of the Messianic era is political sovereignty. Right? The end of chapter 9 of the Hilchot Shuvah, the Rambam wrote it, and we didn't dwell on it. But, we have political sovereignty. Wait, but the Rosh Memshalah, the Prime Minister doesn't wear a kippah, so how could that be God's work? Wait a minute.
Now he does.
Now he does. Hang on. So, it's not our job to tell God how to work. And
We're not the judge.
we're doing our best, and we're happy. It seems like things are moving in the right direction. There's more Jews in Israel than thousands of years. The first time we do have sovereignty, it's a Jewish government. Wait a minute, it's not absolutely Jewish government. Hang on, because there's an Arab party in the government. It's very hard to make all these. So people argue. People debate. And that's okay. That's what we do. We're Jewish, right?
There were many kings that were not perfect.
That's right. In First Temple era, right? There are many kings that worshipped Avodah Zarah. Yeah, I don't know that we're worshiping Avodah Zarah. But anyways, we don't have at least I don't have a clear prescription of how everything's going to unfold. We have a general direction, of course. Much more than a general direction. We have mitzvot, which tell us how to act and how to bring about the day. And we know what our job is. And we can celebrate each and every little bit, a glimmer of hope, and more than a glimmer of hope. Each piece of the puzzle which gets built, even if it doesn't get built in exactly the way we expected it to, and in the order where we might have expected it to. I never would have imagined singing in class with someone from Italy and Brazil and Alabama and Germany, let alone Florida. Where are you from? Oh, many places. Canada, Afula. So we can't. You can't make this stuff up. Only God can. So, okay. Does that answer that question? Another question. Two more questions.
Wait, so going back to the topic of animals and how in the future we're not going to eat animals. Is that true?
Possibly. We said possibly. That's one interpretation. Yeah.
So would we still do the temple service?
Possibly. It's one interpretation. That was the temple service for sure. That's part of the picture of the future days. But what exactly the temple service will look like, I think there is some debate. Simple reading is, of course, all the verses in the Torah speak about animal sacrifice. That's the way the temple is structured, is around animal sacrifice. Simple reading is that yes, although there are indications that some rabbis have felt that, that's the rabbi's job. You mentioned this morning that the Sanhedrin, if we do have a consensus, if we have a high court sitting in Jerusalem, they have a lot of power of reinterpretation, going way back earlier than what the Tanaim said. They can reinterpret the Torah, and they can say that doesn't apply anymore. Maybe we'll only have plant sacrifices, the mincha offerings, the meal offerings, but not that's what it's quoted in the name of Rav Kook, although it's unclear that Rav Kook actually felt that this was the end game. But as we said, there's many different stages. At the end of the Shemona Esrei, every single day, we have a funny little 3 lines. After we take the 3 steps back. Can anybody recite them in Hebrew? Okay, stop. That's the first one.
Okay.
Right? So may it be your will that you rebuild your temple and give us our portion in your Torah. Okay? Sham navodcha b'yirah ki me'olam muchshanim k'imra. And there we will serve you with awe and reverence, like in the old days, like in the good old days. So it sounds like we're asking for the restoring of the temple service. We are. And then there's one more line. The arva.
The arva, Hashem, it's like mincha.
Minchat Yehuda v'Yerushalayim ki me'olam chashim k'imra. And it will be favorable in your eyes. The arva Hashem, arev. We say it in the morning blessings over the Torah. Arev means pleasant. Be pleasant. It will be arva Hashem. It will be pleasant for the Lord. Minchat Yehuda v'Yerushalayim. The mincha. What do we say the mincha is? It's the meal offering, the grain offering. It's plant offerings from Judah and Jerusalem, just like in the times of old. So why is that stressed? Seems like that we ask for the temple service to be restored, just like in the old days, but then we say, what are we going to bring? We're going to bring the meal offerings. Maybe there's a little bit of an indication that there'll be meal offerings and not the other types of sacrifices. So we don't know exactly. The simple reading is we have a mitzvah to build a temple and to make as soon as we get a chance, we're going to do what God wanted of us. But of course, that option always exists, that the Sanhedrin will come and they'll say, for some reason, they'll find some pasuk or find some rationale to say that we're not going to do animal sacrifices anymore. Anything could happen. But as far as we know now, that's the goal. Bezrat Hashem, and if that's the will of the Lord, that's what we're here for, right? That's right, we work for Him. Right, Ruvain?
Amen.
Welcome back. How are you feeling?
Baruch Hashem.
How's your daughter?
Thank you for asking. She's much, much better.
Oh, good.
Much better.
Okay, hopefully it's nothing long term. We'll have to see. Bezrat Hashem. Okay, so back to any other questions about what we started so forth, the laws of pain to animals.
I heard
One more
about-
question. Yeah.
In my previous community, one of the rabbis there explained to us that the reason he doesn't have pets, like cats and dogs, is because they're not kosher.
Mm-hmm.
And is there have you heard about this before? Is it common practice?
So this is a spiritual thing. It's very interesting. Yeah, that some people say that I don't want to have in my house any non-kosher animals because they're non-kosher. So, right, the Torah, I always talked about it, that there's 2 sides of the coin. One side of the coin is whether you can eat it or not. The other side of the coin is whether you can go to the temple after touching it or not. Purity and impurity. Right? The same thing we said about the rules of sex, right? We said there's just 2 sides of the coin. There's one is whether you're allowed to have sex with your wife at that time of the month or not. The other side is whether, if she touches something, can you go to the temple and so forth at that time of the month. So there's always 2 sides of the coin. We don't have a temple anymore. So that side of the coin of purity and impurity really doesn't apply. We're all assumed to be in the status of impurity. We've all been to a funeral before. Well, sometimes we've been to a hospital and somebody died there. we come into contact with the dead. That's part of the way we live our lives, and dead animals and so forth. And so we don't really practice tumantara at all anymore. So to practice and think about that and say, well, not only should I not come into contact with the dead animals, which would cause me tuma, even the live animals, which don't contract tuma, I'm not going to bring them into my house because they have this ritual impurity in potential. You can see it's a stretch. It's we don't have any of those laws at all nowadays. But some people, they want to be very pure and they're very holy, and they say, if the Torah calls it an impure animal, I don't want to have it in the house. There's even some people that say, I don't even want to have any children's books which have pictures of the non-kosher animals in them. Yes, there's all sorts of chumrot, stringencies, which people take upon themselves. But in terms of halacha, there's nothing wrong with in terms of having pets, we'll talk about it more. About having pets in your home is it's complicated. There's other things to say about it, but just in terms of the purity, impurity question, I think that's a big stringency. Yeah.
These people do not have a nut in their house.
That's right. That's right. That's right. It's
No, but my question is like.
Good point.
Domestic animals. If I have a dog, like what it's about Shabbat, like what I can do, what I cannot.
Good. So there's all sorts of questions about that. In essence, essentially, animals are muktzah. Animals you're not allowed to move them, but you have to take care of them. So you try to take care of them without moving them, but you let them.
In your house, it's not moving, is it?
No.
Yeah. Question is, can you pat your dog? We'll get to it. But,
we can take a walk with the dog in Shabbat.
You have to. He needs to get out. He needs to. Also, it would harm your dignity if you don't let the dog out, if you know what I mean. Right? You'll be cleaning up after him, and that would be not ideal. So we learned about it last year in the laws of Shabbat. We talked about the laws of pets and muktzah. We spoke about it. But I'm happy to review the bottom line is, of course, you do. And then what happens if you need to take your dog out for a walk? He needs to go to the bathroom. And there's no A-roof. So definitely you won't be carrying him. But he can walk, so that's fine. There's no problem with that. What about the leash? But the leash, well, he's carrying the leash. You have one side is on his collar. The other side is in your hand. Who's considered to be doing the carrying? So you're not. In most places where Jewish community, there's an A-roof, so you don't have to worry about that. And as long as you're not. But those are the laws of muktzah. But let's talk about having pets. The first one we said is that you should feed him before you eat yourself. Some people say you're allowed to have a snack if it's just a snack, but meal times should be meal times. So you should make it a habit that you always feed your pets before you have a proper meal, and that way it'll remind you to feed them. You'll take proper care of them. But we'll see some more details as we go along. Okay, sure. Russell, you had another question, yeah.
It kind of builds off what we were talking about with the korban and inflicting pain on animals. So
yes.
And I guess this builds off an earlier lesson as well, talking about shafting an animal. So
yes.
Were the same laws for being sure not to go too deep, not too shallow, not to inflict unnecessary pain on an animal, observed the same way in the Beit Mikdash as they are in terms of livestock today?
Right, almost exactly the same, for sure. The laws of Shechita originally were only allowed for korbanot, right? And then we read the passage in the Torah where the Torah says, oh, you're going to be so far away from the temple when you get into the land of Israel, I'm going to allow you to do slaughter, even not of sacrifices. But there are some fine differences when it comes to birds. They did a little bit different. The laws of Shechita birds, we said already, is different. We mentioned that it's only one of the pipes, not two pipes, that have to be cut, slit. But for all intents and purposes, the same rules of slaughter apply in the temple as well. There has to be kosher slaughter for it to be a kosher sacrifice. But it's good you're bringing us back to the issue of we do use animals. We use them for their meat, and we slaughter them. Oh, isn't that painful? Well, we said that Killing them is the least painful way of, slaughtering is the least painful way of killing them. So, but we're still killing them. Can you kill an animal for no reason? If you're not going to eat the meat. So here we start to get into questions where it gets complicated, right? Because why are you putting them down? We have this concept that we don't say killing the animal, we say we put them down. Right? It's a sort of a laundered word. It's a prettier word than killing, but essentially we killed them. And just now in the north of Israel, unfortunately, you might have heard that there's something called the swine, not the bird flu. Bird flu really is the largest outbreak in a decade and more of the bird flu in the Golan, and unfortunately, Israel is the center for migration of birds from Africa to Europe, and they all come through this thin, narrow bottleneck over land because they don't want to fly over the sea. They need their resting points, and so Israel is blessed with a tremendous amount of bird life coming through Israel every year. There's a place up in the north. It's in the Chula Valley. The Chula Valley is just above the Kinneret. Used to be another lake called the Chula Lake. It was more like a swamp, and so that's why the early Zionists drained it, because there was lots of malaria and bugs. And then slowly they realized that maybe that was a mistake, and so they tried to preserve it. Anyways, now there's a nature preserve there, and they actually make a point of spreading feed so that all these migrating birds, we're talking about millions of birds a year, come through Israel. And people from all around the world come to, and they study about birds, and we learn about them, and we protect them. So unfortunately, this year, because of this bird flu, a lot of the migrating birds got sick and died. And it's not a pretty scene. In any case, what do you do when you have a bird flu in your coop? If you're a farmer and you have hundreds and hundreds, thousands of chickens, in order that the flu doesn't spread, you have to kill them. You can't, of course, it would spread disease to, sell them and slaughter them, and, it's very dangerous. So apparently 1 or 2 children got bird flu. They were on a tiyul with their school. The school went on a nice outing to see the birds. And a few of the kids petted one of the birds, or 2 of the birds, and they got sick, and their whole class got sick. And it's not a simple scene. So there are times when it's necessary for humanity that you can kill the animal, just like you can kill them in order to eat its meat. You can kill them in order to protect yourself, and to protect, sometimes it's even to protect them. If an animal's in pain, I'll tell you a personal story, but then we have to stop and give you a break before the next class. I had a dog when I was growing up. He was about my age. I had him from the age of 5 or 6 through to the age of 13. And, dog age, it's times 7. So, by the time he was 7 years old, that means he's, 70 years old. And one day I came back, and, my parents did everything they could, and we gave him medicines, but his time came. He got cancer, and so they put him to death. They killed him, and the truth is, it's to save the animal from suffering. He was suffering. He couldn't walk at the end. He was so weak. He couldn't eat. He couldn't do anything, and so sometimes we kill the animal out of what we call, for humans, that would not be allowed. Right? We disapprove of mercy killing, right? But for animals, we talk about, there is such a concept as mercy killing, right? For humans, we're on a different status. Humans are created in the image of God. We're spiritually, every moment of human life is precious, and we have a special holiness that the animals don't, and we never, almost never. You're not allowed to put a human to death. It's called murder. And even if the person wants you to and asks you to, doctor's not allowed to. It's very complicated nowadays in Western society. It's becoming more and more popular, more and more common. That more governments are allowing people to actually, whether it's push a button or give the directive to the doctor and to administer whatever it is, or to refrain from hooking up certain machines or actually pulling the plug. It's becoming more common. But without getting into that topic right now, that is totally forbidden according to Jewish law, with, of course, some nuance, which we'll talk about another time. Whereas by animals, there is the concept of that if the animal's suffering and there's no point, there's no future to him, well then we put him to death to clear him of his suffering. But that's all we have time for today. We're going to talk about more of these practical examples of all these how do people raise geese and duck and all sorts of issues, which are quite hot issues. The fur industry, all sorts of animal products, and this issue of not causing undue pain to animals. We still have another day or two to cover all the practical examples. So Bezrat Hashem, we'll do more of this tomorrow.
Let's say